to Suits and Sneakers, a series featuring sage advice and candid conversations with seasoned leaders from diverse backgrounds and styles. I'm your host, Carrie Tuttle. With my guests, we deep dive into the areas of team engagement, motivation, and effective performance management. Get ready to be inspired and transform your approach to leadership. Please like, subscribe, or follow to be notified when episodes are released. Let's get started. Today's guest is no stranger to the emotional roller coasters of leadership and life. Lucky for you, he's not afraid to talk about it. Mike Cameron is a 3-time TEDx speaker, fellow podcaster, keynote speaker, ultramarathoner, and a Canadian author with over 30 years of leadership experience, including 16 years as a CEO. He's the founder of Connected Men, a community built around emotional connection and men's well-being. After the murder of his girlfriend, Mike walked away from the company he built to focus on what he now considers to be the most underestimated threat to organizational performance, the emotional disconnection of men in leadership. Through keynotes, workshops, and his Connection Lab framework, Mike helps leaders move from functional to emotional connection, because the gap between the two is where burnout, turnover, and needless chaos live. Mike, welcome to Suits and Sneakers.
Hey, Carrie, thanks so much for having me on. I'm excited to have this conversation.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. I'm so glad you are here. You have quite a story, and you've been very brave in sharing it. Can you walk us through some of your journey from founding your first company and what was going on for you at the time?
Yeah, I mean, well, there's sort of a lot to go through,
I
but
know.
I've been an entrepreneur for 30 some odd years. I started in finance when I was in my early 20s, had a pretty terrible experience there with some fraud and deception, things like that. I eventually went on to found my own company in 2003 and ran that for 16 years before I walked away. And part of the catalyst for that shift for me was 2015. As you noted in the introduction, my girlfriend was murdered by an ex-boyfriend who subsequently took his own life.
Oh.
And, it really had me stop and take stock of what really matters and all the things that I had been chasing, the performance, the accolades, the financial success, the business success, the notoriety, if you will, the reputation, and by many accounts, I'd achieved a lot of that. But really, when Colleen was murdered, it just had me step back and start thinking about what really matters. And I started thinking a lot more about how I can shift from success to significance. How can I take what I've done and make it actually mean something? Because, I think in my 20s and 30s, the meaning was in the pursuit. And then maybe for a time, it was in the accomplishment of that pursuit, always pursuing a little bit more. But then it became, why does this matter? So now what? And it was interesting because I actually had this conversation with a coaching client of mine a couple of weeks ago. And we were talking about sort of the what's next for him. And he was talking about, he was struggling sort of wrapping his head around that. And so I said, let me articulate this for you. You're running a race. You've won. You fucking won. And now you're like, now what? Because he's been very successful in business and recognizing that, I no longer have to chase that. And now it's at that now what point. And I realized for me, that was where I got to is okay, so I've done the things, but now what? And in hindsight, I also recognized that I was burnt out, that I just, I walked away because I just didn't care anymore.
So let me ask you a question. So is the struggle partly in the meaning of the achievement, but also in that there's sort of not that pause of like actually celebrating along the way before, setting that next goal, like pause and enjoy it and acknowledge it before saying, yeah, but what's next?
Sure, Carrie. Sure. I acknowledge that, but let's go. What's
Yeah,
next? Yeah,
right.
it's that I've heard it described as the hedonic treadmill, right? We just keep going and going and going, and no matter what
Mhm.
we accomplish, and I'm not a big fan of the global we's, so I'll use I statements. For me, yeah, it was always what's that next piece? Okay, great, done that. What's next? What's next? What's next? What's next? And absolutely, I see that with a lot of leaders. How do we get off that treadmill and just, to your point, slow down a little bit, take a pause, take a breath,
Yeah.
and acknowledge not only what we've done, but why it matters. And for me, when I could no longer answer the why does this matter question, that was when I realized it was time for me to make a change. And so I did. And it has not at all been what I expected, but it's been very rewarding.
Yeah, I'm sure that big a transition will have you asking a lot of questions of yourself. So, not what you expected makes sense. I know that you talk a little bit about emotional intelligence and versus emotional competence. Can you talk about those two
Yes.
ideas?
Yeah. So again, when Colleen was murdered, and I started looking around at, okay, how do I actually make an impact? How do I take everything that I've learned in the last 30 or 40 years and have that actually mean something? And when I looked at what my skill set was and what I've learned, I recognized that very early in my sales career, people buy on emotion and justify it with logic. So I really dove into that and started working to get better at that emotional intelligence piece, as you say, and learn everything that I could. And the more I learned, the more I realized that not only do people buy on emotion and justify it with logic, as human beings, in fact, we make decisions based on emotion. And when I looked at what happened to Colleen, this was a man that made a very permanent decision based on a very temporary emotion. And looking at men in general, typically we're not really good at sitting with our emotions. And if emotions drive our decisions, decisions drive our behaviors, and our behaviors ultimately drive our outcomes. Oftentimes what happens is we try and brute force change the behavior to change the outcome. But the reality is we need to take those two steps back and look at what's the emotion that's driving the decision, that's creating the behavior, that's driving the outcome. And again, in the context of what happened to Colleen, we can talk about building a better restraining order, try and brute force change the behavior. But I thought, I think that's, how do we build a better restraining order is probably the wrong question. And maybe the better question is, how do we prevent men from getting to that point in the first place? And given my background in sales and leadership and the work I've done with leaders, I started to recognize that, as we talk a lot about emotional intelligence and leadership, I think we do it a bit of a disservice because it's kind of become a bit of a platitude. And it really hit me. I was speaking with one particular leader, and I asked him, what is your biggest strength as a leader? And he replied almost immediately, emotional intelligence. And I was kind of taken aback because I'd seen him work with his team. And I thought, no, that is absolutely not your strength. There are some things that you're really good at. That is not it. And so I started thinking about the difference between emotional intelligence and emotional competence. And, if you think in terms of golf, you can have all the theory behind the perfect golf swing. But unless you've been out there and practiced it 10,000, 50,000 times, you can have all the golf intelligence in the world and still not have any golf competence. And the same holds true with emotional intelligence, or like I said, I would frame that as emotional competence, because for me, that's ultimately the goal. It's not the intelligence that's the goal, it's the competence. And especially now, and you and I touched on the AI piece, right? We've got artificial intelligence we don't need more intelligence. What we need is more competence. And so for me, that's a very important distinction.
Yeah, for sure. And you kind of made that frame of theory versus practice. So, what did you do with this client to help transform some of that awareness, let's call it awareness, into practice and competence?
Yeah. And in that case, I mean, it is a matter of what I would call experiments. So let's try some experiments. Let's try some different things. Some will work for you, some won't. Some you'll like, some you won't like. But let's try a series of experiments with your people. So things like even just creating the space to allow folks that we lead to share what's coming up for them in the moment. And again, that doesn't mean creating a platform for people to tell 20-minute stories about how miserable they are, but just an opportunity to say, how are you feeling today? And so one of the experiments is what I would call the 2-word check-in. So at every meeting, just quick round table, give me 2 words. How are you feeling this morning? Anxious, excited. Perfect. Next, right? And so there's no story, there's no context. It's just, what are you feeling? And for the people we lead, that's a bit of a release valve. So if they're stressed, I mean, just by articulating, Carrie, I'm really nervous about this podcast, that in and of itself just helps dissipate some of that energy. And it also sets the tone for you as the leader of this podcast to say, okay, Mike's coming in a little hot. He's a little stressed. Maybe I can adjust. I might need to be a little more gentle with him today than I might otherwise. Maybe I don't go for those really aggressive, hard-hitting questions right out of the gate. I build some rapport first, right? So as a leader, it does 2 things. It creates that emotional connection between you and your people. It allows your people to dissipate some of whatever energy they're bringing to the table. And, sometimes it's had a stressful morning trying to get the kids off to school, or little Johnny wasn't getting in his car seat. I think about I should say little Christopher, because that's my little, he's not so little anymore. He's 25 now, but I remember trying to wrestle him into his car seat when he was just a little guy. And, that impacts how we show up in the workplace.
Yeah.
And so, we can pretend like it doesn't matter and that we don't care. And I mean, maybe you don't care, but that's one of those experiments that we can try to sort of bridge that gap. So that's an example of one of the experiments.
I think that's a super helpful tip. And I think for people who, and it's not even just a tip, it's actually a framework for how you lead your meetings, because when we come into the meeting, we usually have an agenda, or even if we don't, we have a purpose for being there. And there's task. And most leaders are focused on, let's get through these tasks because we're super busy and we need to get on to the next thing. And just pausing for, what would that take if you had 6 people in the room, 2 to 3 seconds per person, 30 seconds, you have a read on what everybody is feeling and what everybody's bringing to the room. Because if everyone's freaking out and stressed, or if there's gossip going on, or
Right.
if there's fear about an event coming up, or the financials coming out, you want to know how people are feeling, because otherwise they're not listening to anything you're saying.
Yes. And, you touched on the slowdown piece. So depending on the environment, often I will start a meeting with a slowdown. So I've had some folks dub it a mication. So I will literally take 30 to 60 seconds and just say, all right, Carrie, let's just, before we get started, just take a breath. I know you guys, you've been rushing. Traffic was probably lousy this morning. Let's just take a moment and just practice that pause. All right, let's do our check-in. Boom, 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 boom. So it's that, again, I use the framework SOAR, SOAR, and that's slow down, observe, accept, and reconnect. So that was, those were the 2 pieces, the slow down and the observe. And then from an individual perspective, it's just accepting, all right, that's where I'm at. I may not want to be anxious about being on this podcast,
Mm.
but I am. So let's
Okay,
run with it.
so for the leader who is supporting, because I mean, there's two aspects to this in my mind from what you've shared. You've got the leader themselves, and I mean, we're mostly talking about men in this case because that's who your organization supports, but leaders, it happens with women too.
Yes.
It happens with however you identify, and just knowing that they need to do things to take care of themselves. But then also, as leaders, we need to support our team. So I'm hearing two sides to that. Can you talk a little more about that?
Y-
More on that in a moment. If you're listening to this episode wishing you can get more out of your team alongside other purpose driven leaders who want to be more effective, I encourage you to take a look at my program, Leading with Engagement. In it, I provide training and a practice field to gain confidence in communicating expectations that help team members stretch themselves and wow your customers. You'll gain a framework for giving meaningful feedback that motivates and inspires them to engage. Among other skills, you'll learn to delegate and track performance to free up your time to lead more strategically. Go to teammojo.ca for more information. Now, back to the episode. But then also, as leaders, we need to support our team. So I'm hearing two sides to that. Can you talk a little more about that?
Yeah, well, the two sides, because it becomes the opportunity for you as well as a leader to maybe open that 2-word check-in. The financials are coming out next week. I'm a little stressed. So again, I wouldn't necessarily suggest the story or the context with it, but just to be able to set it up for your folks. I'm coming in a little hot this morning, a little stressed. And that, so again, allows you the opportunity to take that slow down, to observe. So you can even acknowledge internally, this is what's coming up. So coming back to that emotional intelligence piece, the old amygdala hijack, the emotional hijack, what happens emotionally happens like that. It's that fight, flight, or freeze piece. But when we take that pause and we label it, that throws it up there. And now we can actually use our rational brain to start to think about it. But it always starts at that emotional level. And that's why I do that. So for the leader's benefit, that's incredibly powerful. And for the folks that we lead, same thing. And I think one of the big struggles I see is this myth that as leaders, we need to have all the answers. So I'm sure when a leader hears you talk about supporting their people, it's like, okay, I need to fix things for my folks. And that is farthest from the truth. What I realized far too late in my leadership career is that 99% of the time, I don't need to fix things. And in fact, often when I tried to fix things, I would just make them worse, because what I thought was a fix wasn't necessarily what Carrie thought was a fix. And she wanted something completely different. And now I'm annoyed because I fixed it for you. What's your problem? And you're annoyed because, oh, geez, I just wanted him to freaking listen to me. Like, I didn't need him to do anything. So then I introduced, and this is another experiment that leaders can play with, is strategy or empathy. So I would actually ask folks when they came into my office with a problem, okay, hang on a sec, Carrie, before we start, do you want strategy or do you want empathy? And that does two things. So one, it makes you pause and go, okay, what do I need in this moment? You know what? I just need to vent because I'm freaking annoyed. I've got this. I can handle this. I'm competent. It's not a problem, but I just need to vent. So then, okay, I just need empathy. Or if it's something that, no, you know what? I need a little bit of strategy. You've got a lot more experience in this domain than I do. I need a little help. Perfect. Now I know what you need. You know what you need, because oftentimes when they first come in, they don't necessarily know what they need.
Yeah.
So that strategy or empathy piece is huge. So when you talk about supporting your people, I just want to make sure that folks don't mistake that for you have to fix your people, because oftentimes supporting has nothing to do with fixing the problem. And it's all about just creating and holding that space for them.
Thank you for making that distinction because, yes, you're right. It's often not about fixing it all. It's literally letting people be okay to be themselves and to vent or like share whatever emotion is going on or say, hey, boss, you're wrong.
Yes.
They need to be able to say that sometimes too. So I love that. You said the SOAR acronym, and now I forgot what the R stood for. So it was acknowledge and
Reconnect.
reconnect. Thank you. So what does that look like?
So the reconnection piece, I mean, that's kind of the result of the other three. And when I think in terms of men and emotions, we weren't born emotionally disconnected. We've been conditioned to become that way. If you think about a toddler, anybody that has kids, they do not have a problem expressing emotions. They're very good at expressing emotions, and probably the boys, maybe even more so to some extent. But over time, we've been conditioned that, boys don't cry, suck it up, don't be a wuss. And we have the emotion conditioned out of us.
Mhm.
So it's not so much connecting, it's about reconnecting with that deepest part of self. And, as you read my bio and you talked about I'm an ultramarathoner, a leader, an entrepreneur, what I came to realize is that had nothing to do with who I am. Those were roles that I got to play. And so reconnecting with that who I really am piece was massive. And that's where that started. So again, the inquiry about like, why does this all matter? I mean, that has to start with self. And when I talk about emotional connection, I talk about connection to self, connection to others, and connection to the world around us. But it has to start with self. So that leader doing that 2-word check-in, like that cannot be performative. That has to be starting with self. I'm here, I'm in, I'm checking in. And in fact, in our men's group, that's how we start things. I'm Mike and I'm checking in. I would do a little bit of here's what's coming up for me physically, here's what's coming up for me emotionally, and I'm here and I'm in. And just acknowledges this is what I'm feeling in this moment. And again, ideally with no story, no context, which is a lot harder than it seems, not attaching because the financials are coming out next week, right? I'm feeling stressed, period. End of story. Doesn't matter why, because when we start to try and explain, then we want to justify the feeling, which means that if we can't, there's this judgment attached to it. And that's the acceptance piece, right? Removing that judgment and just, this is what I'm feeling, period.
Yeah, I love that. It is so deep. And here I have a question. A lot of leaders who might be listening right now. So if you're listening, please turn up the volume because I have an important question. If you're wearing toughness as a badge, Mike, how do you open that conversation with someone who maybe doesn't think that vulnerability really applies to them or their situation, or is like, I don't have time for that?
Yeah, I would offer up some experiments. So the first is, how's that working for you? Because I suspect there are areas of your life where it's probably not working so well. There may be areas of your life that it is working, but I suspect that there's probably areas of your life that it's not working so well. So I would start with an inventory. Where's that working? Where is that not? What might it look like if you were to drop that mask, drop that armor, and actually just be you, all of you? Because the problem that I often see with the toughness mask is we actually have to amputate parts of ourselves, because this soft part of myself, that's not tough. So I cannot display that. And again, it's back to that whole emotion, decisions, behaviors, results. And if we don't acknowledge all the emotions, the ones that we maybe deem not so tough, that's a problem. And again, I would also reframe how we think about toughness. I don't think tough is about sucking it up. I don't think tough is about not showing the cracks in our armor. In fact, I think it takes a lot more courage to be able to say, and especially as leader, I don't have a fucking clue right now. I don't know. But what I do know is I'm here, we're in this together, and let's go. And I think where people fall off that bus, and we'd said something earlier that made me think of this, is that when we talk about allowing that space or holding that space for compassion and empathy, that has to also come with boundaries and accountability. So when we talk about vulnerability in the workplace and sharing emotions, again, often the pushback is, well, I can't show weakness. I can't have a bunch of people laying around on the floor crying because life is tough. We'd never get anything done. Fair enough. So that's the beauty of like a 2-word check-in. Here's your opportunity. What's coming up for you in the moment? Acknowledging that. How can I support you? Knowing that we still have financials coming out in a week, so therefore we have to X, Y, Z. So that doesn't excuse accountability. It doesn't mean that you can sit there and bitch all day about a coworker because you're frustrated with their behavior. That's a boundary. And so that toughness piece, in my experience, is often more of a mask to wear that badge of toughness is not courage. It's actually fear masked. So we wear it like it's courage. No, I'm going to suck it up. I'm going to be tough. And I'm not going to show my soft side because I'm a dude or I'm a leader. Because again, all of this stuff is relevant regardless of gender. There's just some specific societal norms or pressures that men feel that accelerate or perpetuate or exacerbate some of these problems. And that's why I come at this with a very specific lens. So, I mean, everything I talk about, all of the experiments that I offer up are valuable regardless of gender. My hope is that by framing it in a manner of my experience, that it will resonate with other men. And that's the other beautiful thing about, from a leadership standpoint, opening up and being vulnerable. And, as we talked about that sort of 2-word check-in round table, and I was thinking about leaders, and I think about imposter syndrome, and I think about how many leaders are standing there leading that meeting going, holy shit, why am I leading this meeting? I have no idea what I'm doing here. And I remember vividly the first time I really felt that in a meaningful way. I got invited to a round table of like the top 10 organizations in our industry. And I remember sitting around the table with this group of leaders that I had looked up to for years and thinking, I don't belong here. And then realizing that, you know what, I'm sure most of them are also feeling the exact same way. So that's the gift that you give to your people. And when we talk about supporting people, that's probably the biggest gift you can give them is your vulnerability. So as a professional speaker, I used to think that I had to be way up here and be so good at everything that people would look at me on stage and like, oh my God, I could never be like him. And that's kind of what I strove for. But what I've recognized is that the most powerful gift I can give to any audience is for them to look at me and say, oh shit, he's just like me. I struggle with that too. Not that I've got it all figured out. It's that I'm willing to stand here and tell you, like, this is where I see the problems. I don't have the answers, but I'm open to asking the questions. And collectively, I think we can find the answers. And that's powerful.
Very powerful. Like being a real human being in the age of
Right?
AI.
Well, and that is where I think there is a real opportunity. I was going to say to revive some of this, but I do think that will become a differentiator moving forward. And AI, as you and I discussed a little bit, it really needs to be in service of connection, not a replacement for connection.
Yeah.
So some of the leaders I'm working with now, I've got a bit of a tech background, so this stuff really works well with me. And so some of the things that we work on now are how do we leverage AI to free up time, to free up people so that we can create more connection, not so that we can get rid of people, but that we can refocus where they spend their time and energy and effort, because the more we can connect with our customers, the more we can connect with our people, the stronger our bottom line is going to be, without question.
In that same vein, I have a friend who they have an AI consultancy, and they built for a roofing company who you think would not use AI. Instead of replacing people with AI, they built systems so that the people could spend more time connecting with their customers. It's amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's exactly it. It's not about a replacement for, it's just creating that space. So if we can remove some of that, in the back of the mind of our teams going, oh my God, I got to get this done. I got to get this report done. I got to get that done. I got to file this. I got to do that. Some of the things that we can replace, now they can have the time to actually be fully present with Carrie, my customer. Hey, how are you feeling today, Carrie? What's coming up for you? And I don't have to feel like, okay, let's just get this interaction done so I can go back and file my report and do my thing. And yeah, so it's really been fun to see and experiment and explore where we can go with that, and how we can open up some more connection possibilities, and not replace them. And it's, I think that's an important message too. It's not something, I believe it's not something we need to fear. It's something we need to embrace. With great power comes great responsibility. We can use it for good or we can use it for evil. Let's use it for good.
Yeah. You talk also about that moving from success to significance. When you think of a leader who's maybe using AI, maybe still in building mode, how do they apply that significance aspect to what they're doing?
Well, I think that the answer for that is different for everyone. So coming back to the why are you building this? Why are you doing this? For me, in the mortgage business, as an individual mortgage broker working with individual clients, the why, the purpose was that gratification of helping individuals get into home ownership. As I moved up the ladder and started my own business and started supporting other agents and teams, it became more industry focused. And it was, how do we accelerate our industry when we're talking about competing with the banks? And how do we raise the bar for everybody? So that was our why. It was about our passion for the business. It was about our pride in who we worked with and who we worked for, and our purpose. And our purpose was to raise the bar as an industry at that time. So for me, in that moment, that was the significance piece. That was the purpose, but recognizing that shifts over time. And your purpose today may not be your purpose tomorrow. So asking that question regularly, and purpose is maybe not the right question, because I feel like it's kind of, again, a little bit of a platitude, and it's easy to dismiss or just say, be overwhelmed with, like, holy shit, I have no idea, and I'm supposed to know what my purpose is, and I just don't. So I would just ask the question, what lights you up about your business? And, maybe your why is, and I'm working with a client, his why is to create the income that he can have the time so that he can spend it with his family, because that's his value. And I know for me, I would have told you that at one point. But my ex-wife would probably tell you something different, because, I sold myself that story that, well, I'm putting in 16-hour days so that I can have more time with my family. Wait a minute. Why don't you just put in 7-hour days and have more time with your family? And so, I think there's often this delusion about what our purpose is or what significance is. So I would gently suggest just reflecting on that. And maybe that's even a daily reflection. What did I do today of significance? What was significant in what I did today? And maybe it was as simple as holding a door open for somebody, or maybe it was a kind word to a coworker. I think often we get lost in these big grand ideas. It has to be this big massive thing. We're going to cure cancer, or we're going to do whatever. And sorry, my heart gets warm as I think about that question for me. What did I do of significance today beyond this podcast? I've got a friend who's been part of our community for a number of years, stage 4 cancer for 8 years. And it's come back. He's struggling. And so he sent me a text when I was out on my run today. And I thought, you know what? I haven't talked to him in ages. I had my headphones on. I just hit dial and I phoned him and I talked to him for almost an hour on my run today. And that is significant because I know what that means to him. I know that he is the kind of guy that projects tough. He was diagnosed just after he was retired, and he doesn't share a lot of what he's feeling with his family because he doesn't want to burden them. He is the caretaker. He is the provider. He is the one that takes care of things. So he does not embrace that vulnerability well. And I can see it eats him up. So for me to just have that opportunity today for maybe an hour to say, I see you, man. I see you. Just let me know how shitty it is that sharing the story of watching a friend of his die from the same disease that he has and having to, or feeling like he has to put on that brave face and go out because he organizes fundraisers and he's very active in the community, but doesn't have anywhere where he can say, like, you know what, it actually really hits me when I think about the fact that this person I just watched die has the same disease that I do.
Wow.
And yeah, sorry, I went off on a bit of a tangent there, but
No.
it was.
But this is what it's all about, isn't it?
Yeah.
Like, thank you for sharing, by the way. I'm sorry that your friend is going through that, but these moments where we can be there for someone else, that's what it's all about.
Yes. Yes. And that's exactly it. And it's such a symbiotic thing. So as much as he gets out of that exchange, I mean, as you can tell, I get out of that exchange. It's such a powerful thing. And, that's one of the things that I've come to realize is if you want to support a dude who's struggling, set him up to support somebody else, or ask him for his wisdom, ask him for his knowledge. Don't ask him how you can help him. Find something he knows. And I had an acquaintance share a story with me about his dad who's, his wife's passed away. He's retired, so he's pretty lonely. Son knows he's lonely, so he made an effort to try and reach out. But he said, the conversation was always a little bit short and clipped, and because he knew that dad knew that he was just calling to check up on him. And he said, and then one day I shifted it to, I've got a problem with my car, and dad was a mechanic. How can I, what might I be able to do? And he said, right away, I could see dad lit up. And he said, oh, well, have you tried, changing the flux capacitor? And have you done this? And have you done that? And so he recognized that when dad felt like he was being checked up on to be supported, it actually had the opposite effect. And when he actually leaned into dad and what dad had to offer, that's when dad lit up. So that was a really, really cool revelation for me.
Yeah. What do you think leaders out there who are listening could take away from that example?
Again, I think tapping our people for their wisdom, their knowledge. So as much as, what do you need right now? Because for sure, we're there to support, we're there to give the resources, but leaning into looking for maybe ways that are beyond the job description that they can encourage somebody to support the team, whatever that looks like. So again, I think in my own business, I'm a runner, and I remember connecting with referral sources on the run side of the equation. And, so they would ask me about, I'm looking at getting into running. What would you suggest? And of course, then I just light up because it's a passion of mine and I get to share. And it had a very positive effect on business, but it was not sort of the typical how to get the best mortgage type information. And in fact, it had nothing to do with that. But the net result was a very positive. So I think from a leadership standpoint, one of the most powerful things we can do beyond showing our true selves is looking for that true self in the people that we lead, looking to nurture that, looking to leverage that, to give them an opportunity to shine where they shine brightest and where they do light up.
Yeah, I love that. You kind of answered this, but I'm going to ask anyway. What advice would you give your younger self, Mike, going into leadership?
Well, I was thinking about that. I think the answer is that whole you don't have to have all the answers piece. You don't have to wait until. And again, even in the professional speaking realm, I remember it was probably early 2000s. Oh no, it was before I started my business. So yeah, late 90s. And I was at a conference with the company I worked for at the time. And I remember going to our sales manager after watching an incredible keynote speaker. And I said, you know what? I'm going to be one of the top 20 in the country because I want to do that. And so it was this whole, when I become this, then I'll do that. And I think about that often. It's like, what would it have looked like if I just went and did that? If I just did the thing that lit me up 20 years ago, instead of waiting until I was one of the top salespeople so that I had the credibility to.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think the advice to my younger self would be stop waiting for this to do that. Just do that. Period.
Yeah, because conditions will never be perfect.
No.
You'll always move the goalpost.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Same thing I said when we had kids.
Yeah.
We'll never be ready. Let's just have them.
There you go. It's very wise. So, Mike, I know this month is quite significant in your community. Can you say a few words about what's going on in June 2026?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you for the opportunity. June is Men's Health Month. And in particular, I care about the physical, emotional well-being of men. You touched on, I believe that the most underestimated threat facing humanity, not just in business, is the emotional disconnection of men. If you look at some of the ills in our society and you trace them back, I'm sorry to say that there's often a very emotionally disconnected dude at the root of that problem. So when we can have these conversations, when we can celebrate men's health, men's mental and emotional well-being, I think it's important to have these conversations because oftentimes there can be a feeling like I can't speak up because I'm privileged, I've got all the things. But both things can be true. I can be privileged and I can be struggling. So having the space to have that conversation is really critical. And in fact, I'm really excited you talked about a fellow podcaster. So I co-host the Don't Change Much podcast for the Canadian Men's Health Foundation. And tomorrow morning, I've actually got the opportunity to interview the federal health minister as we talk about their strategy for men and boys. So I'm really excited about that. So yeah, June for me is very exciting. Not to mention that we're supposed to be getting some good summer weather now.
Yeah, we're supposed to be. Yeah.
Supposed to.
So thanks for mentioning the podcast. We'll put the link to the show in the show notes for this episode so that people can find that as well. And what about network that you've created, the Connected Men Network? Where can people find you? What can they experience there?
Yeah, absolutely. So Connected Men. So again, I come back to this whole, one of the big challenges that I think we have is, like I said, the emotional disconnection of men. But how do we fix that? And as I started doing more and more of this work, I realized that it's kind of like physical fitness. If we want people to get more physically fit, they need to have space to do that. I mean, again, I know you can just go outdoors and go for a walk, but literally there's a gym on every street corner for your physical fitness. Yet for dudes, if we want to improve our emotional fitness or our emotional competence, where do we go to do that? And the answer for most of us is nowhere. There is nowhere we can go to get emotionally fit. So I wanted to create the gym for emotional fitness, which is why I created Connected Men, which is a men's group. So I started with 6 or 7 guys meeting in our boardroom, and just dropping the mask, dropping the armor, the SOAR acronym. We slow down, we open up, we accept what's going on, and we reconnect with ourselves and with each other. And we just share experiences. And there is a magic that happens when men come together with intention that is powerful. And again, my background as an entrepreneur, I built a large network of franchises. So I wanted to do the same for what we do in Connected Men. So that for me is not a profit center. It's not a for-profit endeavor. It's just because I think the world needs more space for men to practice that emotional fitness. So we built a framework, we built a curriculum, I built the platform. So if we've got the right guys that want to lead groups of their own, we'll teach them how to do that. We give them the themes, we give them the framework, we give them the technical back end, the email engine, the registration, all of that kind of stuff. It's just been growing organically. I started in 2018, and then of course when COVID hit, we dialed back a little bit and went online. Now our online group has folks from as far away as Florida, and we've got a group in Edmonton, we've got a group in Williams Lake, we've got a group in Langley, we've got a group in Red Deer, and we continue to grow and support men that just want to connect. We had one guy come into our Langley group, and the first question we often ask is, "What brought you here?" And he said, "Well, my therapist said I need to become more connectable." And I thought, oh, I love that. Like, do we not all need to become a little bit more connectable?
Yes.
And especially if we're talking about leadership, right?
Yeah.
Like the best leaders are the most connectable leaders. So, and where do you practice that?
Yeah, well, thanks for creating that space. I'm sure a lot of people are very intrigued. So, if people want to reach out and get involved and maybe even start their own Connected Men group, how do they get in touch with you?
Connectedmen.ca, or email me, mike@mikecameron.ca. I'm pretty easy to find online.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Mike. We are going to put all the connection notes in the show notes for today. And thank you again for everything that you shared, as well as all the frameworks that you outlined.
Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
We're glad you joined us for Suits and Sneakers. If you want to be an expert guest, look for the link in the show notes. Don't forget to follow or subscribe to be notified of future episodes.